Good morning, good afternoon, good thinkers. Welcome to Good Thinking Live. For those of you new to the show, this is the show each Monday or most Mondays where we devote just a little bit of time, 30 minutes, to setting aside all the time we spend on what to think so we can devote a little bit of time to improving how we think, which is thinking about our thinking. And the new good thinkers should know that we want to have everyone share who you are and where you're from. And thank you very much to the regular good thinkers who know the drill. For example, Barkley joining from Washington, D.C. Let us know who you are and where you're from. We wish all of the best to our good thinkers in Ukraine who are not able to join us, and our thoughts are with you. And so just a shout out to letting you know we're thinking about you. We're going to get into today's show. I didn't put this out there with a lot of lead time for YouTube and for LinkedIn Live, where we stream Monday mornings, 9 a.m. Pacific time. But hopefully you're joining. So I'm going to say hi to Abdurrachid. Yes, coming in from YouTube, and Ray. Welcome, regular Ray. Oh my God, I love that. Regular Ray reporting in. We've got some Ray, data scientists. We've got all kinds of people. Aha, we have got Aksa from Halifax, Nova Scotia. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Michael, good day and good thinking from Toronto. Okay, so we're getting all these great thinkers coming on to the show, which is fabulous because we are a show about participation and rubber chickens. Stephen says, greetings from, the home to the largest hat museum in the United States. Okay, I did not know that. I'm putting Hat Museum on my agenda. And let's see, Mark. Good morning, Mark. Welcome to Good Thinking. And Octavio from Brazil. Excellent. Sequib from India. And Mark, where are you from, Mark? Mark, you are from Sacramento. Welcome, neighbor to the south. All right, let's get started. As people come in, we'll welcome more people to the show and want to hear what you think about uncertainty. So we're going to talk about risk versus uncertainty, complicated versus complex. And we're going to talk about some new ways of thinking about uncertainty using information gaps. Now, let's start with a couple of things that you mostly think about or hear about when you think about uncertainty. How many of you, and I'll ask this question and I'll welcome a few more good thinkers onto the show, how many of you have heard of these ways to deal with uncertainty? And then you can share your favorite. And then I'll explain how we're going to do this show very differently. So, how many of you have heard mindfulness? Follow a schedule, let go of control, acceptance, increase your stress tolerance. I think I've heard of all of these things and I like a lot of them. Mindfulness is great, working on increasing stress tolerance, acceptance of what you can control and trying to maximize the wisdom of controlling what you can control, all of those things. How many of you have heard of those things? And if you have, put in the chat your favorite. Put in the chat your favorite. Mine might be mindfulness. So, good morning, Susan. Welcome. Let's see who else we have. Michelle from Calgary and Lourdes from Florida. And we've got Adam. Yes, Michael's heard all of them. And good evening from Shafali from India. VUCA. Okay, so all of those things, fantastic. Adam, thank you for sharing that. I think all of those things are great in terms of what to think and maybe even what to do when faced with uncertainty. But because this show is about how to think or thinking about our thinking or metacognition, we're going to do something a little different. So I think it's going to be fun. Hope it's going to be fun and probably useful. All right. Mindfulness number one. All right. Absolutely. We're going to step aside from all of those what to thinks. I'm going to take the banner off because I want to have more room for all of your comments. I'm going to start with the first kind of substantive weird question. All right, you ready? Does uncertainty matter without decisions? And I'm going to be clear about this. I'm going to make it clearer. If you did not have any decisions to make, in other words, all of the decisions in front of you were made for you, because a lot of decisions are made for us, would uncertainty matter? Or does uncertainty only matter because we have decisions to make? So does uncertainty matter with decisions? Yes, it does matter without decisions, excuse me. If there's no decisions, does uncertainty matter? So I'm going to say hi to a few more people. We've got Mark. Mark says, yes, I'm a student of Buddhism. I'm a fan of mindfulness and stress management and the other items you mentioned. Me too. Love it. Love it. Okay. Alamenu from Ethiopia. Welcome, welcome, welcome back to the show. Adam says, we always learn from you, Becky. Oh, well, thank you. We're going to do something. And here's the thing that's cool about this, and I want to highlight this. I always learn from you. That's why I do the show, because this is a community. And so I just value so much what I learned. I think it's a virtuous circle. That's the sole reason I do this show. Anyway, thank you for saying that. All right. Does uncertainty matter without decisions? I kind of think it matters less without decisions. I'm not really clear on the answer about whether it doesn't matter at all without decisions, but it's just something that kind of gets my mind, primes my mind to think about our thinking in this way. All right, so here's the deal. What's a decision you have to make where the outcome is known? Now, bear in mind, when I talk about this, I'm talking about decisions all the way from, the decision to brush your teeth in the morning and to big decisions, kind of complex or complicated decisions, I should say. If you take all of those, one could say we probably make about 35,000 decisions. So what is an example of a decision that you have to make where the outcome is known? And the reason to be this obvious is because that distinction helps you differentiate between all these different kinds of decisions. So just put it in the chat. And I'm going to say, let's see. So Shrifali says, yes, it does matter where our people are concerned. Excellent. Mark says, uncertainty can make people fearful like a fish out of water. Absolutely. I would say uncertainty is attached to making a decision. I kind of think I agree with you, Abdurrachid. I'm going to give rubber chickens to all of these answers because oops, I dropped one of them, but we've got plenty more. All right. So if you think about a decision where the outcome is known, I'm going to give you some examples so that you can frame this, because this is, again, putting our mental models to help us think about our thinking. All right. Like, here's the range of outcomes that are known of what could happen. And this is the outcome that is known. All right. I'll go first. I pull on the refrigerator door and it opens. Okay. I drop a book and there's a noise, a thud. Now, whether it's on the carpet or the floor, I can kind of understand that the outcome is known. There is some complexity and uncertainty in everything. So I'm not talking about, at a physics level, that uncertainty principle. I'm talking about just at our thinking level. So Dane says he agrees. He agrees that without decisions, uncertainty, there's not really, it doesn't matter. It doesn't really matter if we don't have decisions to make. Yeah, I think maybe that's true. Maybe I'm talking about it matters, whether it matters to us. So rubber chicken. All right. So these are the easiest decisions. These decisions where the outcomes are known. All the possible outcomes are known and the outcome is known. These decisions have very little to no uncertainty. Again, acknowledging that there's an element of uncertainty to everything. These are decisions, and we don't have to go into that, but just think about that. Like, there are a lot of decisions that have that. What about decisions where the outcomes are not known, but the probabilities are known? So in this case, the range of outcomes are known, but the individual outcome is not known. And I want to think about this. I'll give you some examples, and you can think of things too, like, that you might have better examples than I do. But some of the things where like all of the possible examples are known, but I don't know. So I'm going to apply for a job, let's say, and I can kind of anticipate what the possible range of outcomes might be. So maybe I won't hear back ever and I won't get the job. Or maybe I'll hear back right away and I will get the job. And maybe I will hear back that I got an interview and I'll have an interview and I won't get the job, or I will get the job, or advance to another interview. But you can actually anticipate all the possible outcomes, but you don't know your outcome. I think of these, and again, these aren't the traditional ways of thinking. This is a new way of thinking, not of a new way, a different way of thinking about uncertainty. But I think of these as risk. Now, you might think to yourself, well, what's the risk in applying for a job? Well, there's a different risk. If you already have a job and you apply for a job, there's different risks than if you don't have a job and you apply for a job. Like maybe your boss will find out that you're looking at a different place, and maybe that will have a good outcome or a bad outcome. But these are things that have risk. So think about that like more like poker. There are probabilities that you can calculate. And what you want to do in this particular case is look closer at the range of outcomes. Let's get some of your comments in. And I'll give you, all right. So Abdurrashid said, for example, the return on investing in shares. Yeah, the return on investing in shares. There's, a range of outcomes, but you don't. And this is good. I'm going to give a rubber chicken because you have no idea how this is going to cue me up for the next one. Fantastic. You have a range of outcomes and you can calculate probabilities. Okay. There's some uncertainty about what's going to happen for your outcome, but you kind of know the range of outcomes. And this is different than the third category. So Adam says less uncertainty. And the best example of uncertainty is the stock exchange. Okay. So you've just leapfrogged, Abdurrashid, because what you said is investing in something, investing in a stock is kind of risk, but you've hinted on the next kind of phase of putting things into buckets so that you can think about uncertainty differently, which is you've talked about uncertainty with the stock exchange. And this gets to the difference between complicated and complex. And we're going to discuss that in a minute. Let's get some more of your comments in. Okay. Then we should think before making any decision there is a probability of hurting someone. Well, you know what? You should think about ideally making better decisions. And this is a great one. Good. That should be part of your calculus. Absolutely. You should think about all the probabilities to the extent that you have access to them. So I agree with that. That's brilliant. All right. Let's see. We've got Amanda. Welcome, Amanda. This happens all the time when launching a new product, service, or business. If you understand ideal customer, your market, and trends, you make an educated guess on what the outcome may be. There's risk, but also reward. Okay, perfect. Excellent, excellent, excellent. So what you want to do with with the risk is look and manage as many probabilities as you can. And if you have access to the probabilities, don't ignore them. Risk versus reward, potential reward, absolutely. Some of these things are playing poker. Another one that is probably, all the possible outcomes, but you don't know your outcome is getting married, right? All the possible outcomes, but you don't know your outcome. So what about the third category? What about when the outcomes are unknown and the probabilities are unknown? And Abdurrashid kind of hinted at that. This is uncertainty. And it also correlates with two other ways of thinking about, different ways of thinking about uncertainty. So this is uncertainty. The possible outcomes are unknown, and my outcome is unknown. This is uncertainty. And there's two important things in the literature that we find that kind of lead us astray. And once we can identify whether we're dealing with a risk issue or an uncertain issue, and there's another kind of fine distinction that we're going to break it down, you can start to avoid a common trap. And that common trap is when you think you're dealing with uncertainty, but you really are dealing with risk. And this is that you have to know to look for underlying probabilities. And here's another thing. You may even need to know a little bit of math. Not a tremendous amount of math, but you may benefit from knowing a little bit of math, a little bit of probabilistic thinking. All right. So we're going to say, bring some comments in. We've got, Adam says, however, there are still those who defy all of that and still succeed. Absolutely. We're not talking about the fact that there is uncertainty in outcomes that can lead to success, even if you had a bad decision process. What we're trying to do is control, to the extent that we can, how we think about our decision process. And that's a great point. We've got Amazon and Tesla. Becky, I have a question. How does critical thinking perceive uncertainty or interact with it? Okay, we're going to get to that. Excellent. I love it. Both were told absolutely fail and did not succeed for several years. Yeah, absolutely. And there's all kinds of outcomes because, and this gets to a point that I want to make, and this is kind of in the critical thinking sweet spot of reliable, relevant, valid. Okay, yeah, so I see what you're saying. Okay, yeah, little typo, but we got that. Yes, brilliant. Yes. All right, let's get to it. Let's get to the reason that I think that people sometimes think they're dealing with uncertainty versus dealing with risk when they're really dealing with risk is because they're not looking at the probabilities and trying to find out the range of outcomes, push out the outcome alphabet for those of you who have taken some of my decision-making courses on LinkedIn. But if you think you're dealing with risk, it might also be uncertainty. And that is also a mistake you don't want to make, ideally. So here is why I think this is, I think this is a helpful tool, mental model tool, where we mix up. I think it's because we mix up two things, complex and complicated. Now, if you look in the dictionary, you might find that these are interchangeable, synonymous with each other. But I kind of like the idea of using these distinctions between the two, complex and complicated, to help guide us in how to think about uncertainty in a way that is more productive to better decision making. All right. So Abdurrachid said, concerning that mistake, we can consider uncertainty as the unknown. Absolutely. So Abdurrachid kind of already touched on this when he said that investing in stocks is a risk decision, whereas the stock market is uncertain. Okay, systems. And this gets to the difference between complex and complicated, or a way you can think about it, All right. What do you think is harder? A decision that is complex or a decision that is complicated? What do you think is harder? Decision that's complex or a decision that's complicated? Now, complex is used to refer to the level of components in a system. If a problem is complex, it means that it has many, many components. The same starting conditions can produce different outcomes depending on the interactions of the elements in a system. Now, there's a level of complexity in everything, but I'm talking about just this way of bucketing things as a helpful tool. Complex decisions have many potentially interacting elements. They have interdependent connections among these elements, and they have a lot of diversity between these elements. Like, okay, pandemic response, foreign policy, climate change, or as I think Amanda alluded to, a competitor entering the market with a disruptive technology. And I'm going to have to give major bonus points here. I'm going to give major rubber chickens just a second. I say with supply chain issues, we are never sure that when we go to the grocery shopping, if the products that we are looking for are available on any given day. Although the outcomes are known, the products are either there or they're not. Okay. So we know, but here's the deal. We know the potential outcomes. We may not know ours. So that's kind of risky. Do we buy all that toilet paper? Do we hoard all that toilet paper? That's a risk that we have to take. All right. Amanda says, and I'm going to give rubber chickens for this. I think I agree with her. I think I agree with you, Amanda, that complicated decisions are harder necessarily than complex decisions. And they're also more controllable. So rubber chicken for that. I think I agree. And we're going to get into why I agree. And you can tell me if you agree or disagree, because, it's not right or wrong answers necessarily. I would say the decision, which is complicated. Yes, Abdurrachid, because the complex one can be dissected into small pieces, which allow you to solve it. Interesting. I think the complicated problems can be dissected into small pieces. And I'll tell you why I think so, and you can tell me if you disagree. All right. Complicated problems can be hard to solve, and that's kind of why they're called complicated. But they can be addressed with rules, recipes, systems, or processes, step-by-step recipes and schematics. So for example, building a bridge is complicated. Managing traffic systems is complex. A complicated problem is predictable and kind of linear. I mean, I don't mean predictable in that you always predict the right answer, but it is linear. You can predict that there is a beginning, middle, and an end. And I happen to love the Great British Baking Show. I love that because they bake these beautiful, I mean, I love the show for all kinds of reasons, but they bake these beautiful cakes and pastries, and they're architectural wonders, and they're delicious. And I'm a horrible baker because I can't follow rules, but whatever. So these are very complicated. And when they do their showstoppers, they have these long lists of all the things that they must do. They break down all of their things, all of their elements. All right. And sometimes the show is in the winter and sometimes it's in the summer. So it's in this tent somewhere in the UK, and sometimes it's in the winter and sometimes it's in the summer. Now, they turn a very complicated cake into recipes, systems, step by step by step. Maybe they have to do 3 steps at once, 10 steps at once. But here's the thing. What I found was that one of the things that contestants consistently fail to consider is the temperature. So they have these chocolate things that they have to do, but if you're doing this in July, there's a probability that your temperature might be different than when you practiced leading up to that. So some of these structures just melt. So this is a complicated task that if you understood the complexity, you could literally turn that complexity into the complicated and adjust for it. But sometimes they don't. They still put the chocolate on there that's going to melt, where they could have chosen a different kind of showstopper that might consider the temperature differential. So how many things are like that for you, where you plan everything, you've got your recipes, you've got your order, you're managing a team, you've got your rules, your regulations, but you're not accounting for all of the different probabilities. So you want to kind of move the things to the extent that you can from complex to complicated. All right. So we've got, then I may ask the difference between how we distinguish complicated and complex. Okay. We're going to get to that. And we've got LinkedIn user. Sorry, I can't see who, but with complicated decisions, one can generally figure out why one was right or wrong. Good luck doing that with a complex decision. Yes, yes, yes. Yes, yes, yes. And to the extent that you can move things that you assume are complex into the complicated category, you want to do that. How do you do that? Because solutions to complicated problems don't work well with complex problems. Complex problems involve too many unknowns and too many interrelated factors to reduce to rules and processes. And there may be no shortage of opinions on these topics, but there are no clear solutions. And this is why one of the things we talk about in our work at Applied Curiosity is not only knowing what to pay attention to, like the weather for the showstoppers for the Great British Baking Show, but knowing who to pay attention to and knowing what their motives are. So there's a lot of people that can share a lot of opinions. Are they mobilizers trying to get you to do something, or are they actually predictors using probability, using applied and basic science to arrive at some information that they hand off to mobilizers who can tell you what to do or what to think? All right. Okay. So here is a tool that I love that you can use to move things along into these different buckets. Okay. Into these different buckets. Enter information gaps. And this is going straight into our applied curiosity work, where we deal and have uncovered, well, we didn't uncover this first information gap. This concept of information gaps came from George Lowenstein, a professor at Carnegie Mellon, where he described curiosity as the gap between what we want to know and what we don't know. So filling this gap between what we want to know and what we don't know is why most of our searches on YouTube, on Google, why we put our put our data into those things to find out what city would be best for us to live in. All of those things is to fill the gap. And that's the basic kind of free range curiosity. We want to know this, we don't know, and how do we fill this gap? But in applied curiosity, we came up with 2 additional information gaps that are very helpful and to kind of in thinking about our thinking. And these, to fill these gaps, or even to recognize that there's some distance in these, that there are these gaps rather, requires a level of intellectual humility and intellectual courage. And here is why. Because you have to be able to change your mind in the face of new evidence and not be afraid, not double down, not be fearful that this is going to take you out of your team. You're going to diverge from the crowd in the way you think. Can't be fearful of that. So that takes intellectual courage. And you have to have a system for upgrading your opinions in the face of new evidence. And we're getting far from uncertainty, but I promise that we're not. So how many of you could feel that how many of you could identify things that would fill the information gap between what you want to know and what you don't know? And how many of you could fill the information gap with different things, which is the second gap, which is the gap between what you know and what you don't know? Could you fill those with different things? Could you fill them with different things? All right. The gap between what you know and what you don't know is probably greater than we think. It's easy to close that gap too soon, but it's better if you can keep that gap open, because that actually increases your stress tolerance and helps you deal with uncertainty. And at the same time, helps you move that dial from uncertainty to risk, where you can put the things in place to move the things from as many elements from complex to complicated and put the recipes in place. All right. So what do we not know? What do I know? What do I not know? We're getting to the third gap. And this is the gap that is hardest to fill. And this is really the kind of the culmination of what I want to talk about in these last few minutes. And you can weigh in. All right. So Abdurrashid says it can be closed so soon you decide not to change your mind. Yes, absolutely. Another rubber chicken. If you close that gap between what you know and what you don't know, or you don't recognize that it's there, you can be blindsided. And that is not a good way to train yourself in how to think about uncertainty. But here's this third gap. And this is the gap that is hardest to fill. And this is the most important gap to think about. The gap between what we want to know and what we don't know. You have to have intellectual humility and personal awareness to know that what you want to know and what you don't know, there's a whole lot of real estate in between. And you ideally want to fill that gap, illuminate that gap to show you, sorry, I lied. What you want, the difference between not what you want to know and what you don't know. That's the other gap. Take that back. The biggest and most important gap, listen to me, like completely did not say the right thing. The most important gap is the gap between what you need, what you want to know, and what you need to know. What you want to know and what you need to know. But you have to know about what you want to know and what you don't know. You have to know about what you know and what you don't know. And then you are ready to look seriously at the gap between what you want to know and what you need to know. And let's talk about the pandemic, because this is a whole realm of uncertainty, depending on where you are in the world, that you might be dealing with it in different ways. All right. I want to know rather, that if I continue to wear a mask and I'm vaccinated and I'm boosted, that I'll reduce my chances of getting COVID and spreading COVID. And by the way, these are two different things. I'm going to reduce my chance of getting COVID, and I want to know that I'm also reducing my chance of spreading COVID. I don't know a lot about transmission versus infection rates. I don't really know that. I can go deep to the science. I can go to some of my sources that have been highlighted, like Charity Dean on Twitter, who was featured in Michael Lewis's book called The Premonition. She was one of the early in the United States, one of the early kind of epidemiologists who rang the bell. So I can go to her. I can go to the Bloomberg. Do I go to CDC? CDC is not necessarily predictors, they're more mobilizers. So I try to go a little closer to the source. But what I want to know and what I need to know, there's a gap. And I have to recognize this gap. And I can recognize this gap by elevating curiosity. All right. And this is how you start to really think about uncertainty in a new way. So I don't know if the vaccines I received will be optimized for infection or transmission. I've tried to look. I get a lot of conflicting information because what we know now and what we're trying to learn is huge. And in between, there's going to be a lot of new information that will require us to update our opinions, our thoughts, whatever. Evidence. Okay? Filling this gap between what I want to know and what I need to know with evidence. Again, when you hear the word they say this, or they say you don't have to wear masks, or they say you can do this, or they say that you can do that. The first question is, who is they? Who is they? Because maybe they're an influencer, but they're not a predictor. Maybe they're a mobilizer, okay? An expert scientist using science and math may be different than a journalist reporting on the expert scientist or a politician reporting on this stuff. So how do you fill this gap between what you want to know and what you need to know? Well, first step is recognizing all these different things. The difference between risk and uncertainty, complexity and complicated. Just having these ideas in your mind help you to fill this gap. And it really does turn uncertainty into excitement. Then, when you have so much uncertainty and you just can't do it, you can you can do the meditation. You can do all these things knowing that you have improved how you think about uncertainty using these kind of mental models. All right. So just ask yourself, is it complex or is it complicated? Is it a really risk or is it truly uncertain? Is it something that I want to know or is it something that I need to know? And how do you fill these information gaps? So hopefully gives you a lot, probably too much for 30 minutes, 32 minutes, but a new way of thinking about uncertainty. And if you want more, let me know in the chat. What do you want to think about? What do you want to have a bunch of good thinkers around the world thinking about with you for 30 minutes? I love when people send me suggestions. I get suggestions all the time that roll into what this show becomes. So thank you. I hope you tune in. Subscribe to YouTube, Becky Saltzman. You can hit that bell for notifications and subscribe so that you get notifications, or you can just follow on LinkedIn Live, where we are here most Mondays, 9 a.m. Pacific time, 4 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time. Thanks. Have a great week.